As bold as lions. As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
As bold as lions.
You're listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast.
Well, hello and welcome to the As Bold as Lions podcast. Great to have you on board. As this goes up and online, it is the second full week of February. The year is rolling along and getting through this month and looking ahead to hopefully some spring and warmer temps, some longer days, some sunshine. Hopefully, it's not too far off from us as we are in the beginning of February right now, and kind of something to maybe just keep our perspective and keep us hopeful for what's to come. But been a good year so far, good 2023. Hope it has been for you as well. I think it's good to just assess at this point the way the year is going, how it's began. We've got a full month under our belt, the month of January. But if we've had some goals that maybe we've set for our lives, or just some things that we've been wanting to work towards, how's that going? When I did the Armor of God series last month, I think in the introduction there, I mentioned a little bit about this idea of goal setting. And of course, that's nothing unique. We talk about resolutions. We talk about what we want to do with a new year. And certainly coming out of the holidays, we have kind of all this just excitement for what's next. And just turning the calendar one page just seems to all of a sudden make us think we're going to be just completely new, amazing characters, whatever the story of our lives is going to bring. But pretty quickly that can kind of start to wear down, and I think we have to reassess throughout the year of where we're at, and maybe that's just pulling back and making our goals not so big and lofty that they're unattainable, or something that we just can't maybe distill into something more practical and steps that we're to take. We can just be a little bit vague in what we're thinking and maybe moving towards. So going back to some of those things I talked about is just being realistic in the goals that we're having for this year, asking these questions. What is attainable? What is it that God is calling me to do? And what are the things that I'm directly responsible for? So think about whether, if you're married, your spouse, if you have a family, your spouse and your kids, beyond that, the friends you have, the church maybe you're in, people that maybe depend on you, but in different ways. There may be people that you're directly need to take care of, but there may be other people that just rely on you for something else, and you're responsible for some part of that relationship. And how do you kind of prioritize those people in your life? So what's attainable? What's God calling me to do? What am I directly responsible for? And I think throughout the year, it doesn't just have to be a new year kind of thing that we look at these things, but throughout the year we can kind of just keep coming back to that and saying, God, what do you have for me today, and how can I move in your will for what these next 24 hours are? And I think that's where we can get way ahead of ourselves and think about, well, what's next month, what's next year, everything going to look like? And not that that's a bad thing, but sometimes we can then not take the little day-to-day steps to get us towards where we want to be in a certain point of time down the road. Taking those day-to-day steps, Just this podcast, for example, I thought about starting a podcast maybe even 3-4 years ago, but you just have this idea of like, oh, it'd be cool to do that. And then you have to kind of break that down into manageable steps. Like what do I need in order to do that? How much time is that going to take? What do I prepare and put towards that and into that? If it's a weekly thing, if it's, every so often, how do I do that? And so kind of reverse engineering things in our lives and asking God to be in those processes. Like, God, I want to do this, but help me walk it back to know how I have to do that. And there's a lot of things in my life right now that I'm just like, here's the goal. How do I get to the goal? And I don't want to just be so fixed on the goal that I'm missing the day-to-day and what's right in front of me. So it's a balance. Putting all that before you just to remind you and just kind of regroup for a moment saying, all right, we're made it to February. Let's keep going. So shifting gears a bit here. Wasn't sure where to go with the podcast, certainly after just this big, like full armor of God series and putting a lot of time into that. And if you follow me on social media, I've been trying to promote that and share and just get people to at least be aware of this series. And especially the beginning of the year, to something just to really grab onto, something really meaty, hopefully, some good helping points along there as we think about the battle that we are in. But shifting gears and just kind of went back into the archives of some things that I've blogged about and talked about over the years that I think are important, that I know I need to keep coming back to and just recognizing the importance of these things. So a couple of weeks spending time on this topic of stewardship. If you saw the title, it's just be generous, simply that. And today, focusing on the stewardship of money and resources. But these were some blogs that were from a few years back, even before 2020, which sometimes doesn't even seem like time existed before then. It was like an era gone by that we'd all like to probably return to, but 2020 just changed a lot of things, really a landmark year for humanity, I would say. But these were from 2019, and I just feel like they're still relevant. There's still some stuff in here to dust off and look at again. Maybe even more than they were in 2019. I don't know. But we're looking at money and resources, a lot about what we've been given, certainly financially speaking. And I think money is probably one of the things that comes to our mind when we start talking about stewardship. When you hear that word, oh, how am I stewarding my money well? My what I've been given. How am I being a good steward, good manager of those things? And when we hear the word generosity, it's almost a certain attitude or pattern of thought that I feel like we need to take on, like a generous spirit, a generous mindset. And that doesn't come naturally. We aren't naturally just generous, self-giving people. I think some people can maybe apart from Christ and apart from the scriptures, have some of these things that they just develop, just trying to be a good person, that kind of mentality. But you don't find a lot of people just generous, in the parking lot of pick your department store. You'll find a lot of people, saying, hey, take that parking spot. You've got here first, or, you need it more than I do, or, going into the store here, you take the last cart, you go ahead, keeping with the traffic analogy. Well, hey, you go ahead in front of me and cut in line here in the on-ramp or whatever, we don't find that a ton. And so if we're looking at money or we're looking at just stewarding well, resources, whatever, there's just a huge context for this discussion. And to really anything we've been given, time, gifts, talents, material possessions, how to use it well, how to invest it into the kingdom. And I think if we steward things well in our lives, the world will start to take notice. It goes against this sort of me first, grab what I need before you take it mentality. Make sure I've got my needs taken care of, and then you can go ahead with what's left over. A couple of quotes as we get started today. I think these are just really good things to ponder as we dive in. And this first one is from Randy Alcorn. It says, "Abundance isn't God's provision for me to live in luxury. It's his provision for me to help others live. God entrusts me with his money, not to build my kingdom on earth, but to build his kingdom in heaven." Just a shift in perspective there. Another one by a man by the name of Ron Blue. This is a great one. "There are two questions a steward needs to consider. 1, who owns it? 2, how much is enough?" If you're stewarding something in your life, who owns that? And secondly, how much is enough? Man, that we could drop the mic right there and just end this, because I think that would give us enough to think about for a while. But before we move into the points, just a couple more things just to set up about stewardship. It's I find that's not necessarily the funnest area to discuss, because there's a lot of negative connotations that it may bring up. And admittedly, there are a lot of pastors out there who don't want to talk about giving and going before their congregation because it's uncomfortable. It's like, talking about tithing or offerings and bringing that before the body and just really putting that back on people to say, hey, we've got to be a giving people. And when anyone starts to talk about money management and how to invest, how to save, how to use your money wisely, there are a bunch of opinions that come flooding in. This podcast and blogs aside, you can go out there and just Google Christian money, Christian money help or resources or whatever, and just scroll that page and just click on some things, see what comes up. So there's a lot of opinions, and there's a lot of really good opinions. There's experts out there, and I think that helps us in a lot of ways. But money is a pressure point for many of us. We struggle with how to use it wisely. And right now, just kind of updating this from 2019 into 2023 context, we're sitting in a time where money is a real issue right now because things are tight for so many. We have inflation, which is sky high. We have just the basic needs, which cost more to obtain. It's harder now to feed our families and provide than it was a few years ago, because everything has gone up, and it's not like the basic wage has necessarily kept up with that, and everything is right even. So how do we live with an attitude of generosity when we're maybe just worried about our own needs, when we're like, I don't know how much extra I have to give because I need X, Y, and Z, and that's changed since, even a few years ago. How can I be generous? How can I live with that mentality? So as we get into some points here, just this time and next time, as it's kind of a two-headed thing on generosity, these are just, again, these bullet point, rapid fire types of things where if you're maybe a note taker, helpful to just jot down the high level, here were the points. However, it helps you just to go, if just to listen, that's great. We're not necessarily, at least this time, in a certain passage. I think next week is a little bit more focused on that. But yeah, I know next week is. This time, money and resources. Next time, talent and time. And these are all things we're entrusted with. These are all things that God says, here you go. Here's the money that you're blessed with, the job, the resources, the skills. Here's the time you have, and use it for my kingdom, for my glory. How do we do that? That takes allowing God to convict our hearts, get his heartbeat for what he's trying to do in his world, and just allowing that to come over us. So hopefully a little bit of that today as we go forward. As we start, I believe in being generous, we are to give of our first fruits. That is our point number one, give of your first fruits. And here's a verse that ties into that, Proverbs 3:9 and 10. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. So first fruits, this term in the Bible, it's really tied into the harvest, and you're bringing an offering into the Lord's temple. You're taking all the crops that you've planted and whatever you're an agriculture type of society, livestock, whatever, you're bringing the first of that to the temple as an offering to the Lord. And really the first part is also the best part. The Israelites were called to bring the best part of that harvest of their livelihoods. Bring that first to the temple. And this signified just giving up control over what they possessed and realizing that this is all the Lord's. It's all his. He gives the increase. We're just giving back to him what is his. More on that later. So today, I think when we talk about giving the first fruits, we really look directly at our own paycheck. What do you do on a weekly, monthly basis or whatever? When that paycheck comes in, what are you doing with that right off the top? Giving that back to the Lord. This is going to be a little challenging for some, but I'm just going to say it how I think I understand it and how I think we live, is that even before you're paying your bills, before you're sending something over to the savings account, before any of the other expenses, we trust God and we give to God, and it's a step of faith. We're saying, here's my tithe, here's my offering. You have that first, Lord, and then I'm going to look at all the other things that I'm responsible for that I need to pay towards. And this is a practice that, again, I've made. I think other Christians have set the bar on this that I respect and I look to, is that you're making that first check, you're making that first direct deposit, whatever it is, that wire, that transfer, it's going right off the top to the Lord, to your church, whatever, that thing that your tithe is going to. And we'll be talking about that here next. It just makes it really easy to just put that first and then live off of what is the rest for the rest of the month. I think that's biblical. I don't see why that's confusing for some people or, necessarily a debatable thing. I think the first fruits are the first things that we receive. We give it right back. And so, going into our second point, this can be a controversial thing too. I'm not sure why, but it's that tithing is still for today. Leviticus 27 verse 30, a tithe of everything from the land, whether grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. There's a couple of schools of thought that I think are concerning nowadays about the tithe. One is that, a literal tithe, 10%, which is what tithe means, a tenth, is not mandated outside of the Old Testament. Now that we live under the New Covenant in the New Testament, I'm not bound by the law. I'm not under that anymore, so I don't need to do that anymore. And so that's one concerning thing. And the second is that a tithe, while it's still biblical, it's not something I feel has to be money. I can tithe other things. One that I've heard used before and is interesting is, I worked for the church a few hours. I donated some time to the church this week, X number of hours. That's my tithe for this week. Or that's my tithe this month. My volunteer hours that I did, that I just I gave towards the church. And I don't know how that's supported biblically. I'm seeing the tithe being still a literal 10%. I'm seeing the tithe still being about money. Because that's hard to, that's where the rub kind of comes in, is that it has to be from our money. It has to be from what we've received, that we give it back to the Lord. I believe that's a biblical point that we can make, that it's still strong. And if we are going to focus on, is it 10% then, or how much do I give? If you want to go that far, you go into the New Testament, and they're giving in Acts 2, they're giving freely of everything that they had. Acts 2:42 through 47. This is the early church. It's the first church. They're not worried about 10%. They're just like, we're sharing our resources with everybody. We're giving, to those that have need. Was it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it whatever? You know what? There's this idea that we have to come to terms with, is that we cannot outgive God. So you make it more than 10%, he's going to give you back what you need. I think sometimes we struggle with that unnecessarily. And then just the idea of whether it's money or if it's something else that I can give up. I challenge you to pray through that. And if it's something where you're struggling with, I think it could just be this month, because I don't want to give from my wallet this month, because I've donated some time, or I've done some things, and I feel like that's my offering. I challenge you to pray through that and to just examine, and I point the fingers right back at myself, because I can have this mentality too of like, hey, I'm doing stuff above and beyond, and I'm helping out here. That's got to count for something, right? Well, I think the true nature of my heart is to say, let me guard my pocketbook a little bit closer. Let me do some other things, but let's not have to dip into this. And I think we just get in the habit of tithing and just giving it to the Lord and just being like, God, it's all yours. It's all yours. So those first 2 points, kind of setting the bar here of where this is about. We're giving of our first fruits right off the top. The tithe is still for today. We can talk more offline if that's something you have questions on, or if you totally disagree with me and you've got, scripture to back yourself up. We can take it from there. But, our next point is that to those much is given, much is required. Luke 12, verse 48, from everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. So the concept of living generously, the idea of be generous, really comes back to a heart issue. And I think that's where I was trying to go with the previous point of like, where's your heart? Check your heart, just to kind of throw that phrase out there. What's behind the motivation of trying to do it this way versus this other way, which I would say is the biblical standard. And if we look at this, if the wallet has control over our hearts, we're going to find it hard to ever get to a point of generous living, of generosity, because the wallet is going to be ultimately what we're slaves to. But if you can see God is able to provide exceedingly and abundantly more than what you can ask or imagine, that's Ephesians 3, verse 20, you begin to see that God money is no issue for him. And that's a point of freedom. If you can get to that point in Christ. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us. Ephesians 3 verse 20, great verse. And this is a hard point for me. To realize that God provides what I need when I need it. It's always been a struggle for me with money and resources and just being like, God, you're calling me into this, but it looks uncertain. Should I go back into this, which seems like more reliable, more steady, and it's also taking him out of the equation, and it's what I can do and how I can provide rather than taking that step of faith. Like, I have to look at him as a provider and the one who will sustain us. And that when he's given us so much, so many resources, especially if I'm talking to fellow Christians who are in this country, still above the poverty line, way above for the rest of the world, even with all the hardships and the tight things that we experience, we are still blessed beyond so many other people in this whole world. And to just realize, like, we can give back, and we can know that we will still be taken care of. Our needs will be met. And when we have this paradigm shift in our thinking, you start to believe God for bigger and bigger things. Again, getting to that idea, like, you cannot outgive God. And it's not about being selfish. It's not about wanting more just out of a greedy, I'm going to give more so hopefully I get more. I want this car, God, I'm hoping you'll kind of repay the favor. It's not for that. But I believe that God positions people to give towards kingdom things as they trust him with their own finances, and they're being generous and living within their means, that God is positioning people and giving them more because he sees that their hearts are willing and open to be extended and used, and he will funnel through you more and more. Some of the richest people I've met within the church are people that outwardly they don't look rich. You wouldn't be like, oh man, that guy's a millionaire. That guy, him and his wife, they've got whatever, like you don't see it because they're not outwardly wanting to look that way. They're living humbly. They're living within the means of somebody would have far less than them, but they know, like, man, I can invest in the kingdom. I've been given much. Much is required of me, so I will give back, and I will not hold on to, just wanting that nicer thing, that nicer car, that bigger house, whatever. Like, some people that live in this lifestyle, they don't drive the nicest, newest thing because they're content with what they have, knowing that, man, this life is too short to get hung up on just some of these things that don't matter in the long run. They know their treasures in heaven. And man, that's a model I aspire to. I'm not anywhere near that, but I think those examples, if you can find them in your life, if you can find them within the church, they're great people to look at how they've handled money, how they've handled blessings, and ask them, like, man, I really want to follow you in that practice. And there are people that have realized this next point, which is it's all God's anyway. Psalm 24, verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all its people belong to him. Talk about just things freeing us up to give, freeing us up under the weight and the bondage of, man, am I going to make it this month? Man, do I have enough? It's so tight. The dollar that I have is getting stretched so thin. And just being like, going to the Lord and being like, God, this is your dollar. I'll give you a dime out of it because I know that's what I'm called to do. I'll give you even more than that if you call me to, if you lay that on my heart, because I believe that's in obedience. But the rest of it, the rest that I need to live off of, would you make a way for me to continue living off of this and provide? because it's all yours anyway. The dollar I bring you, the whole thing is yours. And just to get that shift in our thinking, to look at things through that light and through that lens. This is one of my favorite points in this whole discussion, going back and going over this as I've pulled this blog back up. It's all his. The cattle on 1,000 hills, that verse talks about that. Like he owns it all. So why am I sitting here struggling so much with like, what do I have? God, you're going to provide. You're going to make a way. And I want to be just generous and a good steward of the resources you've given. Have you ever stopped to consider what will be important on your deathbed? Will it have been the stuff that you bought, the house you lived in, the cars you've owned? Probably not. Probably at that point, none of those things are going to come to mind. But what will matter are those things that you cannot put a price tag on. Did people see Jesus in you? Did you have an impact for the kingdom? Have your family and your friends and beyond been influenced to follow Christ because they knew you? Having this realization that everything is his anyway, it frees us up to not hold on to life so tightly, to not just white knuckle it through every day, especially with our wallet in hand and just our bank account and saying, how am I going to get through this? He's in control of the finances. He knows what we need. He also knows what we don't need and what we should stop wasting time thinking about. And this, I can't express this enough. This change in thinking is transformational. It gives us the opportunity to rely on him and not on our own abilities, not on our own way to make money, and make everything happen. To just say, God, you're in control. You're going to provide in the way that you can. And I'm here to see you every day, every week, every month, just continue to go forward and keep me, as I live generously, to continue to make sure that my own needs are met and that you're going to take care of it. Our fifth and final point, we've thrown out here quite a few things. Just to recap. One, we're giving of our first fruits. Secondly, our tithe is still for today. Third, to those, much is given, much is required. And we just mentioned that it is all God's anyway. We're finishing up with tying back into this quote from Ron Blue. And this fifth point is, how much is enough? Ron Blue says there's two things a steward needs to consider: who owns it and how much is enough. And think of this verse from Luke 12:19. This is this parable of this rich man. It says, I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. This parable, which just looking ahead, this is one passage that we could draw out a lot from. Didn't take this into consideration when I was thinking my outline, but this is one passage that this final point kind of just hammers home on. This parable of the rich fool, it's Luke 12:13-21. Key takeaway that I see here is that God's mindful about how we approach our savings and our money management, that God cares about those things. And in essence, each of us has to ask, how much is enough? In that question, we have to disconnect our wallets from our hearts and ask God to fill us with his desire and not ours. This rich guy says, I'm going to build bigger barns. I'm going to put more away. I'm going to, I'm good. And, there's the rich fool aspect. Like, it's like, you're foolish. Your life's going to be taken from you. And we have to look at things with a clear point of view and perspective of Christ. Being a good steward means that we finish well all the way to the grave and even beyond. Have you determined what your retirement is going to look like? Have you determined will you have money even to retire? Are you hoping to make donations after you die that'll benefit other things, perhaps a church or other ministries? Those are some questions just to have. At my age, I honestly, I haven't thought a lot about that. I don't even know what I may have by that time, if the Lord should tarry. But if I do, who benefits from that? We can leave all our money to our families, and there's nothing wrong in that. But are there other things that maybe we should consider and pray through? Certainly, to think about that. I'm not going to lead you any further on that. I'm just going to say, leave that between you and the Lord. The idea of planning for the future, being generous towards others, that's a lifelong thing. And even beyond the grave, like, how will what you did with your money then extend to either bless others or maybe not help them in a way that they could have been helped. To those much is given, much is required. And there are Christians out there that, again, those millionaire, silent, secret millionaire types of people that when they pass on, somebody's getting stroked a check for some ministry or some church, and they're going to be like, wow, I didn't even know that this person had these resources and would be able to do something like that. And what a testimony of faith to that. Talked about a lot today, and I can see my timer kind of clicking up here. So I don't want to spend too much time on this last point, and kind of start to land a plane here. But the rapid fire, nature of this doesn't necessarily always give me enough time to maybe expound more. And this is where you can definitely pray through each of these things, think about them a little bit more. And just the concept of money and stewarding resources well. There's a lot more that we could say on this topic, but I've tried to just put some Bible verses in that tie in and guide us on each of these points as we flesh it out. But, the Bible itself has so much to say on money, and it is the primary resources that we should use to get to God's heart on the matter. We should go to the Bible and say, like, what is God saying about money? How is he saying I should use it? Greed is a subtle sin, and I find that it's one that pokes its head regularly, on a regular basis, in my life. And when I'm not plugged into the Word, when I'm not plugged in with the Lord and have fellowship with him, I start to depend more on my money and my own ability to support myself and whether or not that's going well. And I start to you think about Peter walking out on the water and whether he's looking at the Lord or if he's looking at the wind and the waves. If you take that in terms of money, it's me looking at, do I trust God or am I looking at my money? Am I looking at my bank account? Those are the wind and the waves. And where's my hope, basically? And one challenge that I would leave with you is just to say, are you looking and are you living in a posture of clenched fist, kind of making a fist and just grabbing whatever you can for yourself? And just being like, I just got to get through this day. I got to get through this week. I got to get through this month. And I just got to cling to what I have or what I can get. Or are you the opposite posture of that with open hands and just freely giving and allowing what it passes through your hands onto someone else to be benevolent, to be generous? Those are two just diametrically opposed postures, but that's how I see people. I see people either just completely laid bare, open before the Lord, saying, God, I'm freely giving. You're freely giving. I'm freely receiving. I'm freely passing it along to someone else. I'm giving it back to you. I'm going to live with that mentality. or man, I'm going to try to get through this day somehow with what I have and hope that I have enough for tomorrow and the next day. And when you get freed out of that mindset, it is an amazing thing. And I would pray if you're in that place of just white knuckling it and clenching what you have, to just say, God, how do I open my hands? Show me how that looks. Do some self-evaluation this week. This is a personal thing. It's something I don't want to poke at too much without saying, hey, I struggle with this myself. So if I'm poking at anybody, it's me. But to just put that out there and say, hey, pray through this week's episode, pray through next week's episode. And just as we are still at the beginning of this year, let's think about being generous. What does that look like for ourselves? It's the goal, to speak in truth and love. It's whether I speak on stewardship or any other topics, just to say, hey, this is what I feel the Lord's saying on this topic. This is what I sense He's wanting me to say and to share. As always, I'm grateful to be on a journey with you, knowing that God is leading us, is guiding us from week to week. And I would love to hear from you. You can email me at info@derekcharlesjohnson.com. Even if that's hate mail over everything that's been mentioned today, I'll take it. But do know that before I even hit record on any of these messages, I'm just praying God use this and use me. I'm just a vessel. So wanting to just put it all back to Him and give it to Him. Thank you so much for joining me today. I want to end with our closing verse, our theme verse, Ephesians 5:15-17. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. Take care, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Hey guys, this is Derek Charles Johnson. You have been listening to the As Bold as Lions podcast. I am a blogger, a songwriter, an artist. And if you've been encouraged by this podcast, please go ahead and subscribe and share, and head over to derekcharlesjohnson.com for more encouraging content. God bless.